What's up, you guys? This is JP, and today we are doing the next episode in our key points series, and we are going over the deadlift. So this series was created to be able to help you learn exercises in an easier way. Exercise tutorials are good, but the thing is sometimes they can kind of overwhelm you. For example, we're talking about the barbell deadlift today. In a regular exercise tutorial, they're gonna talk about starting position, they're gonna talk about bracing, setting up, speed of repetitions. They're gonna talk about a ton of things, and while that's perfectly fine, you as a beginner, an intermediate, or an advanced lifter might not know exactly where to start. So this series is where I take one exercise and I take one level, either beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and I give you 1 to 3 things that you should focus on to be able to help you master that exercise. And early on, it's gonna be more important things compared to later on. Obviously, when you're a beginner, there's huge holes that you might be having in your lifting technique. So we're gonna talk about those things for the barbell deadlift today. So this episode of the Key Points series is gonna be for beginners for the barbell deadlift, and I have 2 very important key points for you to focus on as a beginner, okay? These 2 key points are gonna give you the most return on investment to help you learn the barbell deadlift so that later on you can focus on more of the kind of nitty-gritty details. So the first tip, and I've talked about it before on my channel, so I'm not gonna go super in-depth with this, and this is, again, probably one of the most underrated points of the deadlift. And even when I'm training people, and if you're a coach watching this and you want to help teach your clients, or if you're just someone wanting to get better at the deadlift yourself, this is something that I see so often, even from people that I'm coaching, and I really have to tell them to slow this down because they just tend to mess it up, is starting position of the bar for the deadlift, okay? This is extremely important. So one good cue that you could take, there's a couple for this, is you want the bar to be over midfoot for the deadlift, or you want it to be about 1 inch away from the shins, either or. Again, midfoot would be a little bit more accurate, but just because, again, for simplicity's sake, some of you might want something even simpler, you could say 1 inch from your shins, okay? What this does is it prevents the deadlift from being too hip hingy or too much like an RDL, but it also prevents the deadlift from being too squatty, okay? You're not sitting too low. Either one of those positions, if you make the error of starting too close to the deadlift or too far from the deadlift, a couple of things are gonna happen. One, you're not going to be able to produce the maximum amount of force that you're going to need to be able to again, make the most strength gains over the long term, or gain the most muscle mass over the long term as well. And 2, it's going to throw off technique. No matter however you slice it or dice it, it's going to throw off technique. Let me give you a quick example. If you start too far from the bar's not over midfoot, and you bend down, grab the bar, it's going to turn the deadlift more squatty. But what's gonna happen is, as you get to heavier lows, when you get closer and closer to your 1 rep max, or a higher percentage of your 1 rep max you're training with, the bar is gonna end up moving closer to you anyways, regardless of what you do, okay? It's gonna be too heavy the bar is going to be too heavy at greater loads for you, or a greater percentage of 1 rep max, to be too far from your foot. So if you try to lift the bar off the ground, if you can lift it anyways, you're gonna see it drift closer to you. A lot of people, if they record themselves from the side and they're too far from the bar, the second the bar leaves the ground, it shifts back over to them. And again, you can just record yourself and see if this happens with you. So when you start with a proper placement of the bar over midfoot, you're kind of cutting out this step anyways. Now, and this is even if you get the bar off the ground. I'm not saying you should do this if you feel like you can hurt yourself, but a quick little demo you can do is just, if your gym has 10-pound bumper plates, you can put those 10-pound bumper plates on the sides of the bar, stand about 1.5 feet away from the bar, just exaggerate the distance, stand pretty far from the bar, and try to pick it up. Then get really close to the bar, or put the bar over midfoot, and then pick it up from there. You're gonna find it a lot difficult when you're further away from the bar. Now, this is an exaggeration, but at greater loads, this same effect happens when you're a little bit too far from the bar anyways. So again, this is extremely important for setting up. Now, on the other end, like I talked about, is if you're too close to the bar, it puts you in more of an RDL position, or your hips are a little too high. And again, this is also not good. It's not as dangerous or as bad as being too far from the bar. But again, what's happening is, if you're too close to the bar's touching your shins, or it's a little bit behind midfoot, this doesn't allow you to get enough leg drive or enough of that squatty leg pressy feel that you kind of still want a little bit of if you're doing a deadlift. Again, that's what's the difference between a deadlift and an RDL, is an RDL is simply just pure hip hinge. There's essentially no quads in it as well. Whereas even on a regular deadlift, there's very minimal quad involvement, but you're still getting more of that like leg pressy or squatty vibe from a deadlift. So essentially, when you can master this starting position, it's gonna help you lift the most loads, but it's also gonna help you for later on when you just get to those more advanced stages of a deadlift. So it's very important that you keep the bar here throughout the initial setup, the entire thing. Be very patient of this. And one tiny tip in this tip is that what happens is people start with the bar over their midfoot, and then as they set up or as they take the slack out the bar, which is the next tip I'm gonna give you, the next key point, they drop their butt, their shin hit the bar, and the bar moves forward as right before like they do the initial pull, right before they pull the bar off the ground, okay? So be careful that at no point, not the beginning, not right before you pull the bar, does the bar roll forward or backwards even a little bit. People who think that they're doing this, they end up dropping their butt with like a tip I gave you in a different video. Their hips are high, they drop their butt, they set up, and then their shins push the bar forward a little bit. Again, you don't want any movement of the bar once you set up, okay? So make sure you master this tip so it's gonna help you more over the long term. Okay, the second key point that I'm gonna talk about for beginners, and this might be a little controversial one, and I want to touch up on this real quick, is that this is what makes this series different from a tutorial video, because a tutorial video is going to talk about things like bracing. Some of you may see this key point or hear this key point that I'm about to say and say, well, what about bracing? I think bracing is more important than both of these key points. And you know, you could make an argument for that, definitely, but the thing is, bracing is not unique to the deadlift. Bracing is something you want to do on the squat, the deadlift, the bench press, the overhead press. So again, while there are a lot of things you should be doing, I'm talking about things specific to the deadlift. So this key point might be controversial in its application to beginners, but from what I've learned, and I thought long and hard about this, I still think it's important for a beginner to learn because it sets up a lot of other things when you do this tip, and that is to take the slack out of the bar when you're doing the deadlift, okay? What I see with beginners and when I train beginners initially is they want to jerk or jolt the bar off the ground when they deadlift, okay? They essentially, you know, if you play video games and you know like a meter bar, like a power bar with like, you know, power, you go from like 0 to maximal power. What happens is a beginner will essentially go from like very low power and then they just go to 100 and then they jerk the bar off the ground, which again, it does a lot of things wrong. One, in my personal opinion, if you're going to get an injury from a deadlift, which again, it's not, the deadlift's not risky inherently, but if you are going to get an injury, it would be in a situation like this where you're jerking the bar off the ground. So in my you know, personal experience, it's a little bit safer to take the slack out the bar than it is to try and jerk the bar off the ground. Two, what this is going to do without a beginner knowing it is going to essentially reinforce a good starting position. When you take your time, take the slack out the bar first, first before, you know, trying to jerk the bar off the ground, then it's without thinking about it, because you don't want to overload a beginner. They're essentially going slow, they're putting tension in the bar first, and then they're lifting the load off the ground and performing the deadlift. Again, so you don't want to go from 0 to 100. You want to go from like 0 to like gradually up to like 95, and then from 95 you want to go to 100 fast, okay? Then that's when you pull fast. A good cue I learned from the guys at Data Driven Strength, shouts out to them, is you want to pull every pound of that bar, the weight that you're using, except 1 pound. That's a good way to think about taking the slack out the bar. So let's just say you have 135 pounds on the bar as a beginner. You want to put 134 pounds of force into that bar. So again, you're not putting 135 pounds yet. You're not exactly getting the bar off the ground, but you want to put 134 pounds of force, reinforce that good starting position, take the slack out the bar. And then once you feel like you have a lot of tension, then you pull fast from there. This prevents any jerking or jolting and reinforces a good starting position. And it's just going to set you up for more advanced tips and more, you know, those tinier things that you can do later on as an advanced trainee, okay? So overall, this is just extremely important because again, you just want basically and essentially a good starting position. One way that you can know that you are doing this tip right is if you're setting up for the deadlift, you do all your tips, your cues, you brace, whatever it is, and then you take the slack out the bar during your warm-up sets. Or your warm-up sets, one way you can know that you're taking the slack of the bar properly is if when you're taking the slack of the bar tends to, how do I say, it floats off the ground. When I'm doing my warm-up steps and I'm really trying to take that slack out the bar, I'm really walking that tightrope between putting as much force into the bar as I can without lifting it. Sometimes the bar ends up lifting a little bit at those warm-up sets initially because you're just putting so much tension into that bar. So that's a good way to know that if you're truly, you know, trying to take the slack of the bar, because sometimes you'll find that happens. Now, I'm not saying you should do that, and you definitely should not do that during a regular working set. But my point is, that's where you'll kind of get an idea of what taking the slack out the bar means. And then another ways you can look at too is if you're someone who is, just say you're generally stronger, but you can still consider yourself beginner. Maybe you're an intermediate and you're not doing this already and still a beginner tip. You could, if you're using a deadlift bar, which is a thinner, longer bar, you'll see a little bit of flex or bend in the bar before the bar comes off the ground. So that's another way you may or may not be able to tell if you're taking the slack out the bar initially. So again, if you're a beginner and you apply these 2 key points, good starting position of the bar and taking out the slack out the bar, again, this is gonna help you kind of leapfrog a lot of other people who aren't applying these tips and are kind of just doing whatever they want, whatever they can for the deadlift. So apply these tips, let me know how they work for you. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. If you guys like this video, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. For other fitness related content, go to my website.